Who designed it? Who benefits? Why the plan was never to pay it back?
In 1953, Germany received the largest financial gift in history. In the heart of London, the world's richest government sat down and agreed to erase half of Germany's debt, a nation that had ignited 2 world wars and caused immense human losses. They did not do it out of mercy, but because they understood one thing: a country crushed by debt cannot rebuild. 40 years later, those same governments told Greece, Argentina, and Zambia the exact opposite. That contradiction is not an accident. It is the architecture. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly who designed it, who benefits from it, and why the plan was never, not once, to pay any of it back. Here is the question I want you to hold. Think of the last time you earned interest on anything: a savings account, a pension, a bond. Now ask yourself who was on the other side of that payment, and could they actually afford it? The London Debt Agreement of 1953 is the most important financial deal you were never taught in school. Germany owed approximately 30 billion Deutschmarks in post-war debts to the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and dozens of other creditors. The terms agreed upon that year were extraordinary. Creditors canceled roughly half the debt outright, capped repayments at a percentage of German export earnings, and crucially, suspended all payments until Germany was reunified, a condition that effectively postponed the bill for decades. The result was the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. West Germany grew at over 8% annually through the 1950s and became the engine of European prosperity. Debt relief built the German miracle. Debt enforcement broke the Greek one. Now compare that to Greece in 2010. Athens owed roughly 300 billion euros. The IMF and European creditors intervened, but not with cancellation. With conditions, pension cuts, mass privatization. Unemployment that hit 27% by 2013. The economy shrank by a quarter. A generation of young Greeks left the country and did not come back. The lesson is not that debt forgiveness is always right. It's that who receives forgiveness and who receives austerity is a political choice, dressed in the language of mathematics. Whenever you hear that a country's debt is unsustainable, ask the follow-up question: unsustainable for whom? Here is a question most people never think to ask. When a government issues a bond, who actually buys it? The answer will surprise you because part of the answer is you. In the United States, approximately 22% of publicly held Treasury debt sits inside pension funds and retirement accounts. Another significant portion is held by mutual funds that form the backbone of ordinary investment portfolios. In the United Kingdom, insurance companies and pension schemes hold over £1 trillion in gilts. In Japan, the Government Pension Investment Fund, the largest pension fund on Earth, managing roughly $1.5 trillion as of 2023, is one of the single biggest holders of Japanese government bonds. You are the creditor. You just don't know it yet. This matters because it reframes the political debate entirely. The United States does not simply borrow in its own currency. It exports its currency and calls that stability. After the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944, the dollar became the world's reserve currency. Every country needed dollars to buy oil, to trade commodities, to service foreign loans. That demand for dollars gave Washington something no other government on earth possessed: the ability to run chronic deficits without facing a currency crisis, because the rest of the world absorbs the excess dollars as savings. Economist Barry Eichengreen called this America's exorbitant privilege, a phrase originally coined by French finance minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing in the 1960s, who watched Europe accumulate dollars it didn't want and couldn't refuse. America's debt is the world's savings. That is not an accident. The mechanism works as follows. The U.S. runs a trade deficit, meaning it imports more than it exports. Those excess dollars flow to foreign central banks, which invest them in U.S. Treasury bonds, lending the money back to Washington. The U.S. then spends those borrowed dollars on goods, many of them made in the very countries doing the lending. It is a closed loop that produces American consumption and foreign accumulation, until the countries accumulating decide they want a different deal. Follow the story of the petrodollar system agreed between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia in 1974, and you will understand why oil and debt have always been the same geopolitical story. There is a phrase economists use to calm people down when national debt figures look alarming. We owe it to ourselves. It sounds reassuring. It implies that if the debt is internal, it cancels out. What one person pays, another receives. But this framing contains a hidden assumption that the payers and the receivers are the same people. They are not. Interest payments on government debt flow from taxpayers, predominantly wage earners, to bondholders, predominantly institutions and high net worth individuals. In the United States, the wealthiest 1% of households hold approximately 53% of all financial assets, according to Federal Reserve data from 2023. The bottom 50% hold roughly 2.5%. This is not a conspiracy. No single person designed it this way. But it is a consequence. A structural consequence of a system where the asset of debt ownership is itself concentrated. The next time a politician frames debt as a burden shared equally by all citizens, ask which citizens own the bonds and which citizens merely fund the interest through their taxes. The answer will tell you more about economic power in your country than any GDP figure. You've just seen how the debt system was built, who holds it, and who quietly pays for it. But the more unsettling question is what happens when the architecture starts to crack, when a creditor steps out of the shadows and shows a face, a flag, and conditions. Stay with me. The second half of this video is where the system gets personal. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, hit subscribe. This channel exists to show you the layer beneath the headlines, the layer where the real decisions are made. In November 2020, Zambia became the first African country to default on its sovereign debt during the COVID-19 pandemic. It owed approximately $17 billion, a sum that had more than doubled in a decade. What made this default different was not its size. It was what happened next. As Zambia entered debt restructuring negotiations, it discovered that its creditors were not a single institution it could negotiate with. They were a fragmented collection. Western commercial banks, the IMF, the World Bank, the Paris Club of Wealthy Nations, and, crucially, Chinese state-owned lenders, primarily China Exim Bank and China Development Bank, holding roughly 30% of the country's external debt. Each creditor group had different terms, different legal structures, and different political incentives. When the creditor has a flag, debt becomes foreign policy. Zambia's restructuring took 3 years. For those 3 years, the country could not access international capital markets, new infrastructure projects stalled, and the cost of basic imports rose. The resolution, reached in late 2023 required China and Western creditors to coordinate for the first time under a new framework called the G20 Common Framework, a process that analysts described as slow, politically contentious, and unlikely to be fast enough for the next country in crisis. Follow the G20 Common Framework negotiations. They are, quietly, one of the most important geopolitical processes of this decade. Picture a long table. On one side, the countries that set the rules of the global financial system after 1944, the United States, Western Europe, Japan. On the other side, a growing coalition that is done asking permission. In August 2023, the BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, formally expanded, inviting 6 new members, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, and Ethiopia. The stated goal, repeated by multiple heads of state at the Johannesburg summit, was to reduce dependence on the US dollar in trade and reserves. Russia, cut off from the SWIFT banking system after 2022, has been settling energy trades with China in yuan. Saudi Arabia has opened discussions about pricing oil sales to China in yuan rather than dollars. The dollar's dominance was always a political arrangement. Politics can rearrange it. To be precise, de-dollarization is not imminent. The dollar still represents approximately 58% of global foreign exchange reserves as of early 2024, according to IMF COFR data, down from 71% in 1999, but still dominant. The euro, yuan, and yen combined do not match it, but the direction matters more than the current position. If you want to understand the financial world of 2040, track what percentage of global energy contracts are settled in non-dollar currencies. That number is the barometer of everything else. Most people assume that rich countries are immune to bond market pressure. Japan spent 2 decades disproving that assumption, then nearly proved in 2022. When Japan blinked, bond traders noticed. The world should too. Japan is not a cautionary tale yet, but it is the clearest live experiment in what happens when a government pushes debt sustainability to its logical extreme. Watch the Bank of Japan's monetary policy decisions with the same attention you give to the Federal Reserve. What Japan normalizes first, every over-indebted government will eventually face. When a debt becomes unpayable in its original form, history offers only 3 exits, and each one transfers the loss to a different group. The first is inflation. Governments inflate their way out by allowing prices to rise, which erodes the real value of the debt. Creditors who hold fixed-interest bonds receive repayment in money worth less than what they lent. Workers and savers, people who cannot easily index their income to inflation, bear the largest cost. The United States reduced its post-World War II debt significantly this way, from nearly 120% of GDP in 1946 to roughly 30% by the late 1970s. The second exit is restructuring, formally negotiating a reduction in what is owed. This preserves more dignity than default, but requires creditors to accept losses, which is why it is always politically brutal, as Zambia and Greece demonstrated. The third is permanent rollover. Keep borrowing, keep servicing, and never actually reduce the principal. This is the current path of most developed economies. Each exit is a choice. Each choice has a victim. The research here is still mixed on which path produces the least long-term damage. But the pattern across history is consistent. Inflation hits the poor hardest, restructuring hits creditors hardest, and rollover defers the reckoning indefinitely until it doesn't. Whenever your government announces a new stimulus package or spending review, identify which of these three paths it is quietly choosing. The label on the policy will not tell you. The direction of money will. Let's name the real creditor. Not China. Not Wall Street. Not the IMF. The real creditor is time, specifically your future time. Every bond issued today is a claim on the labor, the taxes, the productivity of people who have not yet entered the workforce. A child born this year in the United States enters a world carrying a share of $38 trillion in sovereign obligations before she draws her first salary. Her future income is already spoken for, already committed, already pledged, not to a foreign power, but to a system she was born inside and never voted to join. In 1694, when the Bank of England was created, creditors gave the crown gold in exchange for a promise backed by future tax revenue. 3 centuries later, the mechanism is identical. Only the scale has changed. We didn't inherit the earth. We inherited the debt that was borrowed against it. Here is what that means for you right now. The decisions being made in central banks and finance ministries today, on interest rates, on deficit spending, on debt ceilings, are decisions about whose future gets mortgaged and whose gets protected. These are not technical debates. They are moral ones. And they are being made by people who will not live long enough to see the consequences, using money borrowed from people who have not yet been born. That is the system. Not broken, designed. The question is not whether it will continue. The question is whether enough people understand it clearly enough to demand something better. The world's debt is not a crisis waiting to happen. It is a machine already running, and it runs on your silence. If what you just watched made you see the world differently, that's not an accident either. That's what this channel is for. Hit subscribe. Not professional advice. Consult a qualified expert as needed.